welcome to Nugg Talk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nugg Talk, a weekly podcast where we talk about everything going on in the NBA, and more specifically, everything going on with your Denver Nuggets. I am your host, Loki, and sadly this week I am without a co-host, so it will just be me, and it'll be kind of a shorter pod today, but make sure just to go over some NBA news, just some news in general affecting the Nuggets as well, and just give a little bit of update for the week. But after that, back to regularly scheduled programming. We'll have both of us here, and we'll go more in depth with everything and have a topic for next week. But just to start off everything going on this week, again, not much big news going on, but one big news that did happen in our division was the Portland Trailblazers did give CJ McCollum a 3-year, $100 million extension this past week, which is a lot of money. Definitely is a lot of money, but I think more than anything, he showed that he is definitely worth that contract, especially with his performance against us in the playoffs. He definitely was the reason Portland beat us in the playoffs. It was not Damian Lillard, it was him, and they are coming off of a Western Conference Finals berth, which is the first they've had in a very long time. So if they think, there's been debate about where it's a good contract extension, where if it's a bad contract extension, it just depends on where the frame of mind of that franchise is. And it seems like they're in a win now type of mode, and they think that they have an opportunity to win now. Seen by the fact that they also gave Damian Lillard a new contract as well earlier in the summer. And they traded for Hassan Whiteside, which helped bolster their starting lineup as Jusuf Nurkic is out, but also helps bolster the bench once Nurkic comes back. And if Hassan Whiteside is willing to take that bench center role, even maybe could use him as trade bait later on to get maybe a potential third wing star or third star like Kevin Love for them later on. So if they're in that mindset of win now, and they do think that they're able to contend for a championship this year, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't have gave those guys the contracts. Now, on the other hand, you can't say that's probably not a duo that's going to win you an NBA championship. That's probably not a duo that can take you all the way over the hump. But again, they did go to the Western Conference Finals. But again, the West has gone harder with the additions of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to the Clippers, with Russell Westbrook to the Rockets, with AD to the Lakers. A lot more firepower in the West. Going to be in the West a lot more opportunity to miss the playoffs or just get really bad seeding in the playoffs now with how many good teams we have going on, especially with Utah improving, us improving mostly hopefully by youth, hopefully. So we'll see how that all goes. But I think overall, CJ McCollum, that was a good deal for the Trailblazers with the mindset they're in right now. And eventually, if it does come to a point where they are done with the Lillard and McCollum experiment, they can go on to possibly trading him and, using that contract as a trade piece to say, hey, he's signed on for 2 more years or 1 more year. So they could use it either way. So I think it was definitely a very beneficial contract for sure. As in other news, wasn't much else going on, but the NBA did release an all-decades team where they decided from 2010 to basically now, and I guess they're just skipping this year for 2020, the decade of 2010 to 2020, who were the best players, first team, second team, and third team. First team, they said Steph Curry, James Harden, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Kawhi Leonard. And I think that is perfectly the best way to describe 2010 to 2020 in basketball, at least first team players, the best players that existed in that decade. LeBron James, obviously, without a doubt, best player of that decade, generational player of the decade. You can't question what he has done. You can't question his framework. You can't question everything he's achieved during that span. 3 titles, 3 finals MVPs, multitude of All-NBAs, multitude of All-Star appearances, and a couple MVPs as well. So, obviously, definitely obvious number 1 pick for first team. Kevin Durant, again, another obvious pick, especially with him winning 2 championships in Golden State. It just cemented it as he was one of the best players and the second best forward player in that time frame. And then Kawhi Leonard, I think, definitely also cemented it with not only the championship he had against LeBron and the Heat when he was still quite a young player, but now just the run he had with the Toronto Raptors was one of the best runs you'll ever see in a playoff performance type of year, and also just that's the best one and done you're ever going to see for a trade piece where he just took them all the way. It was worth the risk. That will probably never happen again where a team's willing to even take that risk, and even if it is, they're probably going to lose the guy and not even win a championship. So that was just amazing in itself with what Kawhi Leonard had done. So props to him. James Harden can be a little bit controversial, but I think he definitely has deserved it with the MVP he has won, and then also with just the amount of performances he's had over the years. He's one of the best regular season players that we've seen, one of the most offensively talented players that we've seen at the two guard position in a very long time. He also has a six-man award from when he was with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and he's also recorded the most 50-point games in the decade since then, which at 18. So I think just from a scoring output and then also some of the awards he has, six-man, MVP, it definitely was more deserving than some of the other guys that you had on the second team list. And then Steph Curry, latter half of the decade, but definitely dominated that latter half of the decade. Unanimous MVP, definitely most elite three-point shooter you're ever going to have. And he has 3 rings to go as long with it and a couple MVPs as well. So I think just as well for him, it just makes sense. I have no questions for the first team. I think they got that absolutely right. And I think those 5 guys definitely, when you think about basketball from 2010 to 2020, even when you look back 20 years from now, you're going to see a lot of those guys' names everywhere. As most of those guys, except for James Harden, have all been in the finals basically for the past 10 years at least. So, even James Harden, he was in one of those finals, but he didn't really show up, but he was in one of those finals. So, so that's the first team, and I think that's all well-deserved. Second team, you have Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Anthony Davis, Blake Griffin, and Carmelo Anthony. Obviously, this one, there's some questions about whether those guys deserve it, but I think Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis, without a doubt, definitely deserve it, as Russell Westbrook's one of the only guys to ever average a triple-double in a season, and he's now done that multiple times. Also with the MVP he got, and then he's also had the finals appearance with the Oklahoma City Thunder the year they lost to Miami, but he still had the finals appearance. As for Anthony Davis, I just think it just makes the most sense. He's some great generational talent. He's been basically one of the best players in the league since we seen him enter the league, so I think he just makes absolute sense to be on there. Obviously, he doesn't have a lot of the playoff accolades or things like that, but I think just with all the All-NBA's, All-Star performances he's been to, and just some of the stats he puts up, it's easy to see that he is definitely one of the better players of that generation, and will be going into the next decade as well. And then as for Blake Griffin, I think it's a little bit surprising, but then when you look onto it, you think, oh yeah, it actually kind of does make sense for a power forward standpoint. He's been one of the best power forwards of the decade. 6 All-Stars, 5 All-NBAs, great stats. Has improved his game basically mostly every single year he's been in the league. Unanimous Rookie of the Year in 2010, 2011, dunk contest champion. He's just been very important for not only the Clippers franchise, but now he's shown to be important for the Detroit Pistons franchise as well. So I think that's definitely worth it. Chris Paul, again, worth it just because we know why he's considered one of the best point guards in the league, the point god to some people. And he was definitely really good at the beginning half of the decade. He's led the league in assists. He's made 6 all-defensive first teams. He's been All-Star 7 times, All-NBA 6 times. Again, the only thing not on his resume is just postseason success, but for the most part, he's been able to do things that most point guards in this league cannot do, and I think that just makes the most sense for him to be on this list. I don't think any of the guys on the third team could pass Chris Paul if you're going for point guard or just guard performance, but if you're not going just based on positions, then yes, I do think some guys on the third team could pass up Chris Paul and maybe even Russell Westbrook. Maybe not Russell Westbrook just because of the recent success he's had with triple doubles and things like that and the MVP. But going on to the third team. The third team was Dwayne Wade, Kobe Bryant, Paul George, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think all of these guys are very deserving to be on the third team. I think that you can argue for either Kobe or Dwayne Wade to be on the second team over Chris Paul or Russell Westbrook. Mainly more Dwayne Wade, primarily because he does have the 2 championships he won with the Miami Heat. He also has 7 All-Star appearances. You can say 8, but 1 was an honorary appearance. He had 4 All-NBAs. One of the best backcourt tandems for that Big Three era. Was definitely a valuable component in winning those championships. And I think if you do value championships, that's where you can put him over Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul, because he still did put up numbers. Eventually he did decline as the years went on, but he did get those championships, which those other 2 do not have. So if you care more about stats, then I think those other 2 deserve to be where they are. If you care about championships, then I think Dwayne Wade has the right to be considered for the second team. Kobe Bryant's also a controversial one where people think, well, Kobe definitely should be higher on the all-decade list. But I think if you think about it, from 2010 to now, it wasn't the best years for Kobe. He didn't have a championship on the resume, really, after that point for most of his career. And then towards the tail end, he just started to he didn't start to really lose a step, but you could see that he was getting older. And then once the Achilles injury hit, he definitely started to lose a step. He was injured. He never looked the same again. And then he was been gone for a couple years in the decade. So I think that's where you can say that even though that Kobe won a championship in 2010, technically, he just doesn't deserve to be on the list because he didn't play most of the decade. He's been retired for a little bit of it, and even towards the tail end of his career, he wasn't as good as he used to be back in the previous decade. So I think it's fine to put Kobe Bryant there, but I think all these guys are definitely deserving. All these guys make a ton of sense. Giannis, I think, definitely slipped into there just because he now has the All-Stars, the All-NBAs, and now even the MVP, and I think he definitely deserves to sneak into the third team just to, because you're going to see his name for years and years to come. So I think it's right to only put him on there for he is going to be one of the best players in the league for a very, 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 very long time. So I think it was definitely very much deserving. All of these guys, they earned their spot, and I think for the most part, this got it right. The only one I would say is controversial a little bit is Dwayne Wade. But otherwise, I would say for the most part, this has been it was a pretty good list they came up with. And I kind of like this type of style of picking all NBA teams, but more for like the decades. And I hope they do that again in 10 years. So, and hopefully Jokic is on there. That would be great to see him on the first team. But yeah, and then lastly in news, people just continue to keep dropping out of USA basketball and just mainly the FIBA World Cup in general. I do not think Jokic has dropped out yet, but I'm going to check that as I speak. But most of the players have dropped out, which has now allowed for people such as Torrey Craig and Mason Plumlee to make the training camp roster and hopefully make the roster for the United States basketball team. Most players are just dropping out to focus on the season, and then some other players have just said no. I'm still kind of shocked that Gary wasn't invited, and if he was, he probably just said no because he also wanted to focus on the season. So I just think it's kind of strange, but a lot of people are pulling out. Montrezl Harrell got in, and he even pulled out, so I wouldn't be surprised if a couple more did, but the training camp has now started, so hopefully most of these guys are sticking in and going forward in the tournament. I would love to see Torrey Craig in the tournament. I'd love to see Mason Plumlee in the tournament. Just to see some Nuggies in there would be great to see. It's always great to have as many Nuggies as we can. As on the other side, Jamal Murray has also said that he will not be playing for Canada due to a tweaked ankle. No reports of it being anything serious, but he's just being precautious. He's just being cautious with it, and he doesn't want to risk a major injury to his legs or ankle or just anything where he overcompensates and something else gets injured. So He is at the training camp for Canada right now, but it looks like he is going to be out of the tournament for this year. So he is also not going to play. As I looked up, I've seen nothing about Nikola Jokic not playing, so it looks like he's still in. And I would say for Nikola and the Serbian team, this is the best chance you're probably going to get in a very, 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 very long time. This is one of the, no offense to any of the people on the U.S. team, but this is one of the weakest teams the United States has put out in a very, very long time, since probably, I don't know, the 2006 World Cup or 2004. But it's not a very strong team in the standards of what it could have been. Obviously, they're still very talented. There's still a lot of talent on that team. But I think Jokic is by far now the best player in this tournament, without a question in my mind, and he should be able to control the pace enough, I think, against the United States or most of the teams there, to the point where he can dominate and he can really help Serbia win this. So I think if you're a Nuggets fan, obviously nothing against the United States. We all love the United States, but we love to see our boy take his team all the way there. Obviously, Giannis is also in the tournament. Looks like he's going to stay with it, so he's probably the best player actually in the tournament. But I think those two definitely have a shot to take their country somewhere they haven't been before and win gold in this World Cup, or just win the World Cup. I think that Greece has a shot because Giannis is one of the best players in the league, and he can definitely take over, I think, against most of these guys. He proved it when his MVP season, but I also think Jokic can do exactly the same, and Jokic has a couple of other bits of NBA talent around him where I don't think as Giannis does as much. And then again, I haven't looked on the Greece national team to see if they have NBA players other than Giannis and possibly some of his brothers, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I do think for both of these guys, it's your year. If you want to go get it, you're going to get it. Because I think when we get back to the Olympics, especially if this United States team doesn't do well, we're going to see a resurgence of stars playing for the United States again, especially if they don't win. I think it will just, we've kind of taken it for granted when it comes to these things and these tournaments for basketball internationally, as we do usually have the best team. But I think now with a lot of these guys pulling out and things like that, and if we do lose, it'll get some more resurgence in the stars wanting to play for the country, wanting to win that gold. And again, I think they do care more about the Olympics than the World Cup, but it's still just, I think it will help motivate them more if this team does end up doing poorly, which they might not. The United States team still is a very good team, like I said, and they could win. But it all depends from there for the most part. And then as for mainly Nuggets news, for the most part, it's just Torrey Craig going to the United States national team, same with Mason Plumlee. But there has been some rumors of, well, not rumors, just more people talking about with the whole Carmelo Anthony situation coming about. He had an interview with Stephen A. Smith where he talked about some of the issues that went on during his career, where he said it was hard for him to take a bench role, hard for him to really accept that he wasn't a star player anymore in this league. And even when he was in Denver and he talked about the Chauncey situation, he said that he was a young player and he didn't really understand that he didn't need to score 30 points all the time. He didn't really need to score 40 points all the time. And after watching the interview, I could feel for him a little bit, but I just still think that his ego gets in the way a little bit too much, because he still seemed, even in the interview, to struggle with the concept of him coming off the bench. When Stephen A. Smith asked him if that's something to do, he would always say, that's something they've never asked me to do, which I think someone at some point in Oklahoma or in Houston on the team should have asked him, are you okay with coming off the bench? Is that something you're okay with? Now, do I think he should be in the league? I do think Carmelo Anthony is talented enough to be in the league, as long as he accepts that bench role. But now, do I think I agree with John Wall in that the Nuggets should sign Carmelo Anthony, which he said today? No, I do not believe that the Nuggets should sign Carmelo Anthony. One, because we have so many small forwards on the roster with the likes of Will Barton, Torrey Craig, possibly Malik Beasley, Vlatko Canchar, and MPJ, hopefully, when he comes back healthy and things like that. There's just no space for him on the roster unless he's just willing to lay deep down on the bench in the rotation, because I don't see any playing time for him. On the other side, I just don't think we are a good fit for him. It doesn't make sense. He still likes to play iso ball. I think his ideal role would be come off the bench and be the primary scorer for the bench and just play iso ball and stick to what he's good at. And that doesn't just make a lot of sense on our side of things. We still like to pass the ball a lot, even when we go to our bench unit. We still like to play team ball. We don't like anyone to really just ISO it and try to take over. I mean, obviously, in some situations when plays break down, you need some guy like that, and hopefully that could be MPJ, and hopefully that could be maybe Will Barn if he goes to the bench role. But I just think Carmelo Anthony, fit-wise, doesn't make sense to do that, especially because we want to see what MPJ has to offer. We want to see if he can grow into either a starring role, a six-man role, or just whatever he could be. It's something we need to see, and if we get Carmelo, it's going to take minutes away from MPJ, who I think is more deserving of those minutes, and I think Torrey Craig's more deserving of those minutes. Will Barnes is more deserving of those minutes, and Malik, if he does play any bit of small forward, would be more deserving of those minutes. I think all those guys are just better for our team. Now, do I think he should play in the league? Yes, I do. I do still think that if Chris Paul does end up going to the Miami Heat, which I still think makes the most sense for Chris Paul to go to, or Minnesota, I think either one of those two, if he goes to one of those places, he could try to convince the management to also bring Carmelo with him, as they are very good friends, as he was one of the main pieces to try to convince him to come to Houston. I just think it'd be I think that just makes the most sense that if he wherever Chris Paul goes, Melo will probably end up going, especially if he goes to Miami. I think he fits perfectly in Miami, just with who's there personnel-wise, and then also if he is willing to accept that bench role, I think he could really dominate it. And well, not dominate, but be very helpful in that bench role over there. But I just think overall, I am not one for the Melo reunion. Not because of hard feelings, just because I just feel like it doesn't really make sense right now for our team. If we need to add anything to our team, it's more defense. I think offensively, we're a very good team. We just need to improve on our own by making more three-point shots, by just becoming better running the fast break, things like that, not by adding just some guy who is very talented at one-on-one basketball. So I just don't agree with John Wall's statements. I get where he was coming from, finish it where you started, where you built stuff, but just doesn't make sense for us as of right now. But if Carmelo does get back in the league, that'd be good for him. I just see that with the interview, it just seemed like he was still kind of hard about accepting the bench role. But if he does eventually accept the bench role, I think that could be very good for him and could help him out quite a lot. So I think for the most part, if he can accept that, he should play in the league, just not in the Denver Nuggets. But yeah, that's it for most of the news this week. Sorry about the short podcast this week. Just had to make a little tiny one since my co-host Phil is out of town. But I promise next week we'll be back to regularly scheduled programming. We'll go over some NBA news, and we'll have a topic for you guys to talk about next week as well. But if you did like the episode, please make sure to subscribe. Please make sure to like. And if you want to leave a comment, some of your thoughts, we'd love to see those. It's always helpful. Anyone from Reddit, if you also want to comment on there, or comment on this podcast, also freely available on SoundCloud. I put them up there if you guys want to check it out while you're driving in your car. But overall, thank you guys for listening to the podcast this week, and we'll get back to you guys next week. All right, see you guys later. Go Nuggets.